We will now introduce Lesson 17 from Ross, the imperfect tense, the syntax of the imperfect tense, the directive he, and relative clauses. So far we've had the perfect tense and participles. The imperfect tense will look as follows. Whereas with the calperfect, you have suffixes at the end of the root. With the imperfect, you will have prefixes and some suffixes. So here's what it looks like. So if you take pakad, to anoint, then you have yifkod, he will anoint, appoint. Tifkod, she will appoint. Tifkod, you will appoint. Notice that these two forms, the Tifkod and the Tifkod, are identical. Then you have Tifkadi, you masculine singular will appoint. And then you have ek code, I shall appoint. And then with the plurals, you have yik kadu, they will appoint. Then you have tif kodna, which is they, feminine plural, women, they women will appoint. Then you have tif kadu, you masculine plural, y'all will appoint. Then you have tif kodna, you ladies will appoint. And then finally you have nifkod, we shall appoint. So it's important to point out that the second feminine singular and the second masculine singular are identically the same form. And the third feminine plural and the second feminine plural are identically the same form. Now it's going to be important for you to memorize this pattern so that you can apply it to any other strong verb. So if you had katav, it would be yiktov, tiktov, tiktov, tiktavi, and so on and so forth. Now there are some modifications when you get to gutturals. So here you have bahar, to choose. The guttural is going to influence the pattern. First of all, it's going to take as a main theme vowel an a vowel. Now the strong verb typically has an o vowel type. So where you get a vowel between the second and third consonants, it is going to be the holum. So you have the holum in the third masculine singular, and the third feminine singular, and the second masculine singular, and a number of the forms, third feminine plural, second feminine plural will have the O vowel, first common plural. But here you're going to get A vowels all the way through because of the influence of the guttural. Moreover, gutturals will not accept vocal shava, so in those places where you are wanting to put a shava under the middle consonant, as in the second feminine singular, you will get the hataf patah instead. So you get it here, here they get the hataf patah, and then here in the third masculine plural, you get the hataf patah. In the second masculine plural, you get the hataf patah, and so forth. With the third guttural, there's also a influence of the guttural to make the theme vowel a vowel. Other than that, this is very much like the strong verb and is fairly regular. And then with the third aleph, there are a couple of modifications. One, the theme vowel ends up being a long A. With these other gutturals, you end up with a short A, but you get a long A here. So to find is matzah, and yimsa would have a ah rather than an ah as the main vowel. And so that's the major change, but also in the third feminine plural and the second feminine plural, you end up with a segol when you get the timsena, whereas here you get a vowel, and in the strong verb you end up with an o vowel. But because the guttural aleph likes e vowels, it takes the e vowel in this particular case. Now, in terms of just recognizing the form, these variations shouldn't be overly difficult. And again, in the long run, mostly what you're going to be doing in translating Hebrew is recognizing forms rather than creating them. And they're not hard to recognize. Well, let's go on to the meaning of the imperfect. The perfect, as we introduced that earlier, we mentioned that the perfect represents completed action. The imperfect is the opposite. It represents incomplete action. Now, we call this, or rastas, the imperfect tense, but technically tense has to do with time, and Hebrew isn't strict about its time. We saw with the forms in the perfect that sometimes they can be translated as past, sometimes they can be translated as present, and then in the prophetic perfect, or the perfect of future reference, in prophetic predictions that can refer to the future. The same is going to be true of the imperfect. It can also refer to actions in the past or the present or the future. However, the most basic meaning of the imperfect will be the future. The action is incomplete. It's incomplete because it hasn't happened yet, and therefore you would use the imperfect tense. And so he gives you the example here. He will remember the law, yizkor et haTorah. And here yizkor is in the imperfect to indicate that that remembering has not yet taken place. The imperfect, however, can also refer to continuous or repeated action, either in the present or the past. And so here he gives you an example of a repeated action in the present. The English is the Lord judges the righteous, but he uses the imperfect. Yishpot Adonai et ha-tzadikim. And here is something that is generally true. It's kind of a nomic present. It's always true that the Lord judges the righteous. It's also always true that he judges the wicked as far as that goes. But anyway, the action here is something that's universally true, that's always happening, and therefore it's continuous. It's not completed action, and therefore you could use the imperfect. But there's an ambiguity about the time, and so again he gives you another example, yiktov ha'ish. That could mean the man will write, but it could also be the man used to write, that he did it off and on in the past. So it was continual action, and that it incomplete action because There wasn't a definite starting and stopping point. Or the man would write. Again, he did it from time to time. This would be kind of like the imperfect in Greek, if you've had Greek. But then there's yet another meaning of the imperfect called the modal usage of the imperfect. The imperfect tense may represent an action that is not in the indicative mood, much like the subjective mood in languages like Greek. And the translation then may have to use one of these kinds of words, may or might or could or can or should or wants to or ought to or would that, any of those kinds of things. And so if you have a form Yishma Adonai, that could mean that the Lord will hear, future, but it may mean the Lord may hear, the Lord might hear, the Lord could hear or would that the Lord hear, expressing a wish. The Lord can hear or should hear or wants to hear or ought to hear. All of those little nuances are expressed by identically the same form in Hebrew. And again, it could be continual action in the past, used to hear, or would hear from time to time. So there's quite a bit of ambiguity in this tense. And so, like in the Psalms, when the psalmist says, the Lord will hear my prayer, typically that's going to be an imperfect, and it could equally be, may the Lord hear my prayer, expressing a wish, rather than a statement of fact, the Lord will hear my prayer. It's a matter of context, which way you're going to translate these things. Now, the imperfect tense, like the perfect, is negated by lo, or spelled plain A, lo with a holem vav, which will precede the verb. So if you want to say, he will remember me, it would be yizkor oti. But if you want to say, he will not remember me, it would be lo yizkor oti. And of course, it has all those other nuances. May he not remember me, or it could be would that he remember me, or would that he not remember me, or he should not remember me, or he ought not remember me, or even do not remember me. It could be like a negative command is yet another nuance of this imperfect tense. So in any case, that's the syntax of the imperfect. And I think perhaps I will go to the next video to finish this chapter.